1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt was surveying a hillside in southeastern Turkey, about 30 miles from the Syrian border, when he noticed something protruding from the ground. He almost kept walking. What he was looking at were T-shaped limestone pillars, massive ones, carved from the bedrock, smoothed, deliberately shaped. Some of them stood nearly 6 meters tall and weighed upwards of 10 tons. They had been placed in careful circular arrangements, and many of them were decorated. Animals, carved in relief across the stone surface, with a precision that does not suggest accident or approximation. Foxes, boars, cranes, scorpions, vultures. Schmidt had spent years working on Neolithic sites across the region. He knew immediately this was different. Not because of the size, though the size was striking, because of the date, the geological context, the sediment layers, the organic material found at the site. All of it pointed to a construction period beginning around 9600 BC, possibly earlier in some sections. The site, which Schmidt named Göbekli Tepe, roughly Potbelly Hill in Turkish, predated Stonehenge by more than 6,000 years. It predated the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000. And it predated, by a margin that made archaeologists genuinely uncomfortable, what the field had long considered the earliest threshold of complex organized human activity, which was the problem. Let me be specific about what we are talking about, because the numbers matter. The pillars at Gobekli Tepe were quarried from limestone bedrock several 100 meters from the main construction site. The largest weigh somewhere between 10 and 20 tons. Moving them required either large numbers of coordinated workers or mechanical assistance we have no evidence of. Shaping them to their final form, with the precision visible in the finished surfaces, required sustained specialist skill. The site has at least 20 distinct enclosures, of which only a fraction have been excavated. Each enclosure appears to have its own symbolic program. The animals carved on the pillars vary by enclosure, and there are suggestions of intentional variation that scholars are still working to interpret. The carvings themselves show a sophistication of anatomical observation, the musculature of the animals, the posture, the detail. That is not what you expect from populations operating at the threshold of organized society. The site also appears to have been deliberately buried. Around 8000 BC, the enclosures were filled in, not by abandonment, not by erosion, but intentionally filled with rubble, flint tools, animal bones, and worked stone. The act of burial was itself organized. The whole complex was covered and preserved. We do not know why. I find myself returning to a specific detail that doesn't get much attention in the popular coverage of Gobekli Tepe. The oldest sections of the site are also, by most assessments, the most sophisticated, the largest pillars, the most elaborate carvings, the most carefully executed enclosures. They are in the oldest layers. As the site continued to be built and modified over the following centuries, the scale and the quality of execution actually declined. This is unusual. Most things get better over time. Skills accumulate. Techniques improve. The typical pattern in architectural prehistory is a progression from simpler to more complex, from rougher to more refined. At Gobekli Tepe, the sequence goes the other way. The explanation offered by some researchers is that whatever population built the earliest layers was working from a prior tradition, skills and knowledge that did not originate at Gobekli Tepe but were brought there from somewhere else. If this is right, then Gobekli Tepe is not the beginning of something. It is evidence of something that was already old when the first stone was placed on that hill in southeastern Turkey. I don't know if this interpretation is correct. It's one reading of an ambiguous pattern, and other archaeologists have proposed different explanations for the quality gradient. But the question it raises is one the field hasn't fully answered. Where did the knowledge come from? There is a version of this story that goes off the rails quickly. Certain writers have taken Gobekli Tepe as confirmation of a lost advanced civilization, Atlantis, or something like it, a technologically sophisticated pre-flood society that passed its knowledge to the hunter-gatherers of the Fertile Crescent before disappearing. Graham Hancock has made this argument at length. It is compelling to some people. It is dismissed by most archaeologists. The dismissal is warranted in my view for specific reasons, not because the idea of prior cultural transmission is inherently implausible, but because the argument requires filling multiple large, evidential gaps with speculation, and the speculation is structured to be immune to falsification. If there is no physical evidence of the advanced civilization, that is because it was destroyed. If the knowledge transfer left no records, that is because the records were suppressed. Every absence becomes proof of its own explanation. That is not how historical reasoning works. But dismissing the Hancock version does not mean the conventional account is complete. It isn't. What Gobekli Tepe reveals is a genuine gap in our understanding of the cognitive and organizational history of pre-agricultural humans, a gap that is not filled by the existing model, and that serious archaeologists have not fully resolved. The honest position is not, we know what happened, and it is. Not a lost civilization explains everything. It is something more uncomfortable than either of those. It is, the people who built this were capable of more than our models predicted, and we don't yet have a good account of how that capability existed at that time and in that place. That is a gap in the record, a real one. Schmidt himself was asked repeatedly whether Gobekli Tepe changed his view of human prehistory in a fundamental way. His answers were always careful, always qualified. He would say that the site showed human, religious and organizational, impulses were older than the agricultural transition. He would say it required revision of the sequence. He would not say it required a lost civilization or an alternative history. He was, by all accounts, a meticulous and careful man. He spent 20 years digging in that hill in southeastern Turkey, working through layers of stone and sediment, trying to read what was there rather than what he wanted to find. He died before the excavations were complete. They are still ongoing. Perhaps 15% of the site has been uncovered. Whatever is still buried under that hill in Turkey has been there for 11,000 years. It will not be in a hurry.